Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. I am Sasha, the director to the Ishara Art Foundation. We established Ishara in 2019 in Dubai. We're a non-profit organization which is dedicated to supporting both emerging and established art practices. Our objective has been to foster a critical dialogue and trace the many interconnections that shape contemporary art from the South Asia and its diasporas. It feels particularly meaningful to gather around Urdu Worlds, an exhibition curated by Hammad Nasar, who is joining us today, that approaches language not simply as a medium of communication, but I think it as a shifting terrain. One that carries memory, migration, imagination across time and place. Notably, Urdu Worlds marks the first contemporary art exhibition in the UAE dedicated to the Urdu language, as well as the first comprehensive presentation of Ali Kazim's works in the GCC. I find in many ways this exhibition resonates with Ishara's own conceptual grounding. Our name, for example, Ishara, which means gesture, a signal, a hint, across several languages, including Urdu, Hindi, Swahili, Arabic. Ishara suggests a movement or a meaning rather than a fixed point of origin. And our logo, which is also derived from an ideogram by Zarina Hashmi herself, for the word Asman, which means sky, from her series Home is a Foreign Place, which is also included in this exhibition. Similarly proposes language as something spatial, symbolic, and open-ended. So in that sense, Ishara's very name and its visual form both converge with this exhibition's concerns, each enacting language not as a stable signifying system, but as a spatial and effective field through which meaning is carried and sensed. In a visual dialogue with Zarina and Ali Kazim's practices at Urdu Worlds, we begin to see how language does not simply describe the world, but what it holds within it, forms of absence, of memory, of embodiment that are continually negotiated. It is from this position that we would like to situate this conversation, not around defining what Urdu is, but attending to what it does as it enters artistic practice, how it is seen, felt, inhabited, and at times even resisted, how it moves across bodies, geographies, and temporalities, bearing witness to senses of rupture, histories, as much as intimacy, and opening up forms of translation that are as much visual and effective as they are linguistic. So, as we open this evening, not as a fixed conversation, but as one of a shared act of listening, attentive to what language reveals and to what in its quietest registers it continues to hold. We are especially pleased to be joined by Hammad Nasar, Sarah Burney, and Ali Kazim. I'm going to give you a brief bio for each one of them before we plunge in. So Ali, who's a contemporary Pakistani artist, is based in Lahore, whose work is featured in institutions in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Ali is inspired by the art of history of South Asia and the ancient civilizations that once flourished in Pakistan. Hammad Nasar, the curator of Urdu Worlds exhibition showing at Ishara Art Foundation. He is a London-based curator and writer, and presently Director of Programs and Content at Ibraz in London. Hammad's practice spans major international exhibitions and transnational research projects with a focus on South Asia, West Asia, and Britain. Sarah Burney, an independent curator and writer based in New York. Burney is a specialist of contemporary printmaking and contemporary art from South Asia and the Middle East. She previously worked as Zarina's studio manager for 6 years. I believe Burney brings a deeply informed and intimate perspective, one that allows for a reading of Zarina's practice and not shaped only by scholarship, but also by proximity and maybe process and a lived exchange. At this note, I would like to open the floor to both all three of them, Hammad, Sarah, and Kazim. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you, Sasha. Thank you everyone for joining us on this, what is in London a sweltering Saturday afternoon. So I'm sitting here in my home office with all my curtains shut. with a fan next to me on the floor. And that makes me immediately think of another print in Zarina's Home is a Foreign Place of Olu. And that sort of that hot afternoon breeze that climate change is making us feel even in the North Atlantic. So if anything, I think I'm also sort of thinking of Zarina. I'm aware that for most of the people on this Zoom, well, I'm not going to make assumptions, but I think many of the people on this Zoom and many of the people who may um, come across this conversation on YouTube or channels to follow, they may not have had the chance to see the exhibition itself. So the format that we chose to go down, and let me see if we can make this work. Can everybody see the installation image?
Yes.
Okay, great. So the format that we're going to do is as if we're doing a walkthrough in the space of Ishara Art Foundation's beautiful galleries in Dubai. And so I stand here. I'm not going to repeat many of the ideas and thoughts that Sasha has so eloquently also laid out, which are informing this exhibition. But I would want to just maybe précis it by saying that, while language as a technology is something that all of humanity shares, that's how a child makes sense of the world, points things out, communicates, expresses themselves. But it's artists who then get to choose or can then build those worlds, through their manifest those worlds that are built up through language, through their artwork. And through the exhibition, it gives us that opportunity as audiences to enter these worlds and interact with them at a level of feeling, where language becomes feeling. And that's very much the spirit with which tried to make this exhibition between these two artistic languages that on first appearance may not immediately rhyme, but that come from a similar sort of pool of feeling. With that, I'm going to sort of jump in. And the opening salvo, if you like, in this exhibition really grounds the exhibition into land. So thinking about where Urdu is. So on the left, you see this four-panel work by Ali Kazim. So this is a new work, slight for those who in the know, and I think John Taine, who curated an earlier iteration of this work for the Lahore Biennial, will recognize three panels of this that appeared in the Lahore Biennial. And then for the Ishara Foundation exhibition of Urdu Worlds, we have this large four-panel work, which is at a scale that you could almost walk into. And this is an imaginary place, but it's an imaginary place that taps lived experience. It's Tila, which literally means ruin. It's land close to Kazim's ancestral village, just outside Lahore, and it harks back to the Harappan civilization. And on the right, you see a diptych prince travels with Rani. On the left of those diptychs is a series of cities that cross between what is now different independent states of India, Pakistan, but used to be a common India or Hindustan. And on the right, that diptych becomes an abstracted, map, an idea, and maybe Sarah, if I could ask you to think about, what memories come to you when you see this lived land turn imaginary in Travels with Rani.
The pairing is so beautiful because they're both gesturing to a past. Ali is gesturing to this ancient civilization, but Zarina's gesturing to this specific moment in modernity where not only was train travel suddenly a thing, but the fact that Urdu was being used as a geographic marker, and it's both sort of a personal travel log for Zarina. It was a time where she was able to travel with her sister, but it's also she was very sort of she was memorializing the use of Urdu in all of her work. And it sort of begs the question, you mentioned in your essay about Tila, when if the rains come, will we excavate more sort of pottery shards and ruins? And I think for Zarina, it was really a question of like, where are the Urdu signs sort of still remaining? Would we excavate those ever?
Well, and with this, if you think about the land being, well, as soon as you enter the exhibition, that's what you see. What then is behind you? What is, if you like, the foundation of the exhibition is this Home is a Foreign Place, a work that we've already referred to several times, and to my mind is probably the most expansive articulation of Zarina's Urdu world. So it's stretching from the top left, ghar, so literally home, to the bottom right, hudud, border. Zarina runs us through a whole sort of gamut of world making, of walls, of thresholds, the jokat, of things which are, Asman, which you can see reflected in the Ishara's logo, as Sasha has mentioned, but also Zameen and Chand here and Suraj. And then you sort of move down, you move into Lu and Shafaq and Dehshat, or sort of fear. And then you end with these ideas of watan and border, ideas that remained. So it's this expansion of the world. It's also, to my mind, a self-portrait. Zarina famously avoided the figurative in her work, but I would argue that this is a portfolio as autobiography. I don't know, Sarah, how you would sort of think about that.
Completely. This was Zarina's dictionary of home. This held the multitude of meanings that the word held for her. And I wanted to sort of piggyback on your sort of gesturing to the imagery. I wanted to share a quote that Zarina has used in her interviews. I have used the form I have worked with over the years, in a way, my sign language of line, vertical and horizontal, the diagonal, the triangle, the circle, and the square, all deal with basic geometry. I regard geometry as a sacred practice. And her use of the word sacred is so significant here because for Zarina, this geometry, this abstraction, this minimalism, which was, very often read as Zarina coming to the West and discovering these things, Zarina really pushed back on that. That was part of her ancestry, that was part of her Muslim heritage. She would always say that she met minimalism at Fatehpur Sikri. And so this is very much not just her linguistic home and the linguistic self-portrait, but for her, this was visually as much her heritage as linguistically.
That's such a terrific point. And I think also, if you think of home as a foreign place as one of those manifestations of that Urdu world, I would suggest that the collaborative book that she put together with her sister, Kishwar Chishti, or Rani, as she was known, Urdu ke 101 mahavray, so 101 Urdu proverbs, is another. So of course we know that proverbs are a distillation of a worldview, no, that have been passed from generation to generation, and communicate in code. And these 101 proverbs that were selected by Rani were illustrated with 10 woodcut prints that Zarina had produced at the Women's Studio Workshop back in 1991. And you can see facsimile copies of two of them here. and these were then self-published by Zarina in Urdu Bazaar in Karachi, and then were handed out, sort of gifted liberally to people quite often raising kids in the diaspora, so that they do not lose their connection with the Urdu language. So I have two boys, and both of them have their hand-inscribed copies from Zarina. And actually, when the eldest was born, and I did get Urdu Qaidas because it was very important for me for my children to have that connection with Urdu. Came across the fact that the Qaidas that were commercially available, how do we put this politely, were perhaps not the best aesthetic or objects that appealed. And that was a moment of saying, "Hey, I work with artists. I should do something about it." Well, that kid is now no longer. He's 23 years old, so it's too late for him. But that started a conversation, the results of which have appear for the first time in public in Urdu Worlds. And that's this new publication that you see on the right alongside Zarina's Urdu ke 101 mahavray. This is Ali Kazim's Urdu Qaida or alphabet book. And in it, Kazim it's a collaborative project with myself, and it's published by Ochre Books. The book itself is a further collaboration with a wonderful set of designers and typographers. But within the context of this exhibition, I think what's important is that it also houses a new body of work that Kazim produced, a series of 19 prints and etchings and aquatints that are collectively called the Alphabets Portfolio. And here you see one of those prints, Chand. So you see those 31 sort of discs here in Kazim's print. And if you were to step beyond this, you would see that Chand in Zarina's Home is a Foreign Place a little earlier there, where you also see those 31 moons in there. Now, I know, because you shared this, Sarah, that you stumbled onto Kazim's portfolio just a few months ago at the New York Prince Art Fair. And maybe if I can ask you to just share a little bit about that, and then maybe after that we can hear from Kazim on how putting together this portfolio came about and what he's taken away from it.
Seeing this portfolio in the Christea Roberts booth was definitely, I wasn't expecting it. So it was really, I sort of walked into the booth and I gasped out loud because I hadn't seen any prints by Kazim before. I had been following his practice for so long. Actually, Zarina introduced me to Kazim's work when I used to work in his studio. And I was just blown away first by the beauty of the prints themselves. But also, again, this pairing is so meaningful because both the whole Qaida book, but especially the prints and Zarina's Proverbs, they sort of revel in this interiority of not just the Urdu language, but Urdu culture. There's significance to the images and the phrases that will sort of delight those of us who speak the language and that translation doesn't sort of fully capture. And I think it's very, Zarina's work is famously monochromatic. She's always printed in black. And she would speak very sort of clearly about how this was a gesture to the printed page and how she didn't grow up in a house of paintings and she was more familiar with the printed page as opposed to canvas or watercolor. And there's this beautiful symmetry to the fact that Kazim, your first portfolio is also a monochromatic portfolio. And I'd love to hear more, not just about your process of making these prints, which are they're almost photographic in their detail, but in the decisions you made to sort of follow the monochrome.
Well, initially, I thought before starting this project, I thought maybe printmaking going to be a slightly easier way of making images, and I'll be making a lot of plates without much difficulties. But with the passage of time, I realized it's way more difficult and way more technical than making a painting. So over the period of time, I have made around 19 etchings, I think in 1.5 year. And I was a bit conscious of not repeating the color element which is present in my paintings. So I wanted to make it more look like more close to the classic printmaking techniques. So that was one of the reasons to make these prints just in black and white, not adding any color at all.
I learned from Hammad's essay that these are etchings, but they weren't made on copper plates. You were using non-traditional zinc plates.
Yeah, I mean, in Pakistan, we have to, where the materials are not easily available, so you have to do some sort of jugaad in a way. So the zinc plates are available in Pakistan, and I collected different plates from different shops initially just to get the right gauge and figure out the right
But if I can
surface.
interrupt for a second just to say that they are available, but they're used for roofs, not
Yeah.
for
Not for
not for
printmaking.
making aquatints. Yeah.
Not for printmaking. So because it's a material for roof making or some other commercial use, so its gauge is not consistent. Sometimes you have to just struggle to find the right plate. And I wanted to create images more look like rendered through pencil, or the similar effect I wanted to create, which one can do through lithograph. So I wanted to create that sort of effect, but not the very basic line etching. So that I think that surface it helps me using that wax crayon or the China graph material as a pencil to resist the acid.
So Kazim's prints that are in now dialogue with Zarina's through this exhibition. And that print that you saw earlier, Chand, hangs directly opposite the series of called Santa Cruz. So what you are seeing here are five prints. It starts with Santa Cruz, Monterey Bay, Night Sea, Dark Sea, and then there is a single line from a from a poem by Faiz Ahmed Faiz, and the line reads, "Magar dil hai ki iski khana virani nahi jati," which translates, and this is Zarina's translation, but the heart cannot let go of its loneliness. So that's a beautiful sort of punctum of a line that Zarina gives as much real estate as her print. So I think this is one thing that I really wanted to make a point of, is that for Zarina, that one line of a poem is visually as important as the other four elements in this portfolio. And I think what this photograph also helps you see is that one of the things that we were trying to do with this exhibition was this idea of having it's a small island which is largely of Zarina, but also you've seen Kazim's Qaida and Chand in here, but in dialogue within a sea of Kazim, which of course also has works by Zarina. So there's this in and out, and then when you're inside, you can see out, and when you're outside, you can also sort of grasp in. So that dialogue between word and image continues throughout the exhibition. The exhibition proper, as it were, starts from this corner. And I think this corner is doing quite a lot of work. So you see one work by Zarina, the tasbih, that is hanging, and it'll be lovely to, in a while if I just ask Sarah to reflect on that. But underneath the tasbih is the selections of sort of terracotta votive objects is a work by Kazim. Next to it is an early video work called Ghusl, which is a ritual ablution. And not only is it looking at that ritual, it is also a step in the process of washing away layers of pigment through which Kazim's paintings are produced. And then you see one of these paintings of a Haji or a pilgrim. So collectively, this sets up a dialogue, because if you recall where we started, about an Urdu world being based in the land of South Asia, whether it's the Tila of the Harappan civilization or the train travel of Rani and Zarina. It's the exhibition thinks about how we cohabit, how do we live on this land? And it starts with faith and belief as ways of setting up rules of cohabitation between humans, but also between humans and non-humans. And I thought sort of to introduce this material variety at a start is also to point to the kind of the distillation of aesthetics and forms that sometimes appears in what look to be very simple gestures in black on white. Sarah, maybe do you want to talk to us a little bit about Tasbih?
Yeah, so Tasbih and Zarina, over the course of her practice, she made over 20 Tasbih. So this was a form that she really engaged with. And there is a great material sort of diversity in the many Tasbihs that she made. But this one specifically, first of all, the Tasbih, the title makes it a Muslim object, but this form, this rosary, is something that's found across religious traditions, across the world. And I think Zarina was drawn to sort of the universality of this form. But in this one specifically, so this is maple wood that she stained with sumi ink. And she was very specific about her sumi. It came from Japan. Yukari, who also worked with us in the studio and sort of helped fabricate a lot of the works, would bring this back from Japan when she would go visit her family. And this sumi ink is from the incense burnt in temples. This was the original sumi ink. And Zarina was very specific about using this almost devotional liquid. And then the gold that she's gilded it with, gold for Zarina was very much tied to divinity. And yes, we see a lot of gold in sort of Islamic manuscripts, but for Zarina, the sort of gold moment was when she was arriving in Thailand on a boat, and she remembered seeing the golden spires of the Buddhist temples. And that was such a sort of formative memory for her. And for her, the gold is sort of, it really ties to Buddhism for her almost first. And I think just in this beautiful object, it sort of encompasses Zarina's holistic view of spirituality, very much the way Kazim does in his art. Like when Zarina is talking about faith, it's not dogmatically just Islam, it's a pluralistic understanding of faith, and especially faith in Asia.
I think that's such a beautiful, it's that passing of the baton to you, Kazim, with that sort of gesture towards those golden spires of Buddhism, because those are immediately what one sort of thinks of when you sort of see the gold on that tasbih and then you see those votive objects. How did you, because this is quite a distinctive work in your oeuvre, Kazim. I mean, how did you first think of doing this? What prompted these terracotta objects?
Actually, this series started after my residency at the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford. They invited me to look at their Gandhara art collection, and with the hope that I will respond to their collection. So when I came back, then we all gone through this COVID, and that was time when we have plenty of time to set our spaces in studios, our houses. So around that time, I think it was literally working for me as a tasbih in a way, like early morning going to studio, throwing a few stupas on a wheel, and very focused exercise on a wheel, So for me, it was working as a tasbih, like a believer who's rotating beads through his or her fingers. And I was throwing these little stupas every morning, literally five or six stupas every day, and then it's turning process and the firing, and it took long time to produce this body of work. And for that, I have to learn the basic skills to throw on wheel. Before that, I have learned those skills. Just I wasn't good enough to just make a good example. So I think during this COVID time, I had enough time to practice my skills, and through that time, I think I have made these pieces.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think that the point that Sarah was just making, that idea of the holistic view of the spiritual, and I think it's the ideal encapsulation is the work that we now see in the center here, and I'm sort of putting my cursor, circling it around it, is a series of 9 portraits, children of faith. This is an ongoing series that Kazim has been working on for some time, and it's this really beautiful reflection on how we're sort of brought up, even as, before we even think of these things, how we are brought up within our family circumstances, or of what we see other people wearing, how we naturalize of how we carry ourselves into the faith or the rituals that we're born into, whether we're, Sikh, Muslim, Parsi, or in fact, there's a Buddhist boy in here as well, and how we grow up with that. Alongside that, and you can't sort of see it for the reflection, is a really early work by Kazim called King Priest, which references an archaeological find in Mohenjo-daro, this priest king figure with an amulet. You see these sort of rock-like forms right in front of the Tila painting. And as you move further down in the exhibition, we come across this. So tikriyan, which literally means potsherds, as a painting at the back, as a series of drawings. So this is literally dust on mylar that's held together by a magical formulation, which I still quite understand why it works, because there's no fixative involved, but it seems to hold. And then this beautiful sculptural object, which is a bit, it gestures to the art of kintsugi, which is putting things which are damaged and holding them together and not trying to hide the repair, but making that a part of beauty. But these are found objects that Kazim has sort of put together, and these are possibly never going to be whole. So as you walk around the sculpture, you will see that there are holes literally inside that you can sort of see through it. But I also read this object as an act of repair, which will never fully perhaps be completed, but it still feels important that the act is carried out. Kazim, this again feels very distinctive in your practice, and I wonder, how did this work come about?
I think when I moved back from London after my MA from the Slade back in 2012, so at that time I was struggling. I was trying to settle down in Lahore and still thinking of London, because I had spent almost 3 years 2 years at the Slade and another year just practicing my studio in London. So I was struggling between Lahore and London, and I had enough time to just wander around, and I visited few sites not very far from Lahore, and during the monsoon season. So I visited one of the sites which was totally covered with the pottery shards, and after rain, these pottery shards, they glow like anything. They glow so vibrantly, and when I was walking on those pottery shards, it literally felt like I'm walking on some other land. And with the excitement, I was picking up pottery shards from here and there and trying to find something, maybe recognizable form or a little toy or something. And I picked up a small pottery shard which has a thumbprint of the maker. And when I touched that thumbprint, it was very emotional. It was sort of I thought maybe it's a sort of a time travel key. And from that point, I realized I think maybe I have to respond to that site and respond to that site. For that, I collected a lot of pottery shards. I have taken a lot of photographs, and then without knowing that maybe at the end I'll make something out of it or not, I started making this terracotta sculpture, and I left it as it is. I think for good few years, and then in 2019, I thought maybe it's gonna work with the painting or with the large landscape. That's how this piece came.
Yeah. No, I think that's so. Thank you for sharing that. That's such a beautiful story and object, and I think it really that emotional charge that you just described that you felt with feeling the thumbprint. I think that comes across in this object. Um, and if we were talking about children of faith, so bang opposite the wall of where you have the children of faith, so is this particular painting, Ankamacholi. Potentially, these could be the same children, but they're now playing a game of hide and seek. And this then is talking to this other way that we have of making rules. So if faith and belief and religious ritual is one thing that conditions our behavior with each other, play, the rules and how we bend them, and what we follow is another. And there's a whole body of work in the exhibition where Kazim works with those ideas, both with Ankh-Bajoli, but also these two works, Sher Khan and Shah Savar, this act of riding, and sort of an allusion to traveling circuses, etc. With play, then, of course, come stories. This here is the hudhud, so the hoopoe bird, and it's the second time that Kazim is visiting the great Sufi poem Conference of the Bird by Fariduddin Attar in the painting form, and that larger story of how one sort of confronts the self, and overcomes those human frailties of greed, of avarice, of so many, is a story that runs throughout history, that runs through multiple ideologies and forms of thinking, and bang opposite Hudhud is this triptych of Mara's army, in which Kazim is himself playing those the demon kings that were trying to distract the Buddha in his search for enlightenment. So we go from faith to play to stories. And of course, the stories, perhaps some of the most important stories, are not just the stories that we tell each other, but the stories that we tell about to ourselves. And this sort of, we come full circle with this self-portrait by Kazim. And as Marzia pointed out a little earlier in our conversation, you can just about make out the reflections of Zarina's Home is a Foreign Place in that self-portrait. And this was, I mean, if I earlier talked about Home is a Foreign Place as Zarina's self-portrait or even autobiography. So then to have that directly facing off Kazim's self-portrait, a self-portrait where he's looking at a sculptural object of a heart. Whereas just inside that island of Zarina, you have, again, that line मगर दिल है कि उसकी खानाए वीरानी नहीं जाती. So those conversations, those dialogues, those structures of feeling are what we really wanted this exhibition to encounter. And this then wraps up the sort of the biggest and of the sort of the opening gallery in the Ishara exhibition.
Very curious, Hammad. This is so beautiful. I'm so glad we're having this conversation, really. It kind of brings the whole show together for all of us yet again. But Hammad, very curious at this point. Your choice of Ali and visiting Zarina together. I mean, where did that come from? How did you think of the two of them to kind of work collaboratively in terms of this exhibition unfolding?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good question because whenever I would talk about this project to people who knew both practices, there would be almost be a quizzical look, which is said, yeah, we know, you're not doing this flippantly, but why, and how? Because on surface, they're very different languages. But I think one of the things, and both are conversation projects that I've had for not years, but decades. And the Urdu Worlds, that idea of an Urdu world, first came to me on Zarina's passing. And I was invited to write a tribute to her in Printmaking Today. And I talked about Zarina's Urdu world.
Right.
And as to the one that she was building for herself, because she often described herself as an Urdu artist. The sort of that pain of being estranged, too Muslim for the US and India and too Indian for Pakistan, so she's like, oh, can you take refuge? Can you make language your home?
Right.
I would argue it makes for an unstable home, but to think through that, there was this conversation with Kazim. The one source was the Mahavray's book was an absolute inspiration for me, but I think also one of the reference for our Qaida project that Kazim and I sort of launched on. So in a way, if you think about those Book of Mahavras and the Qaida as two distillations of Urdu Worlds, it felt really important to stage that in an exhibitionary form. And then when I thought about where would you do such an exhibition, I think Ishara became an obvious point, not simply because you use Zarina's ideogram as part of your identity, and the first show had Zarina in dialogue with Shilpa Gupta as it happens. But I think in terms of this notion of of this region where Urdu is a mother tongue, not that region is perhaps, is best observed outside the region itself, So Dubai or the UAE in general, and I would argue Urdu Hindi is probably the largest spoken language in this area. So is this a place where people who may not be able to read it, but could feel it? And I think that then became the impetus for saying, can we make an exhibition in which people can feel their way towards Urdu? And and fun fact for Art World Trivial Pursuit is that although Kazim and Zarina never actually had a conversation together, they, of course, knew of each other's practices. And when Zarina was asked by a New York gallery as to, they asked a whole bunch of quote unquote, legendary artists to pick artists who've never shown in New York. Kazim was one of the artists Zarina picked. And that took place in 2012. They had shown together in exhibitions that I'd curated. But actually had not sort of kind of met, and it just and you are never going to bring those people back. But with Zarina's work, and I think just the way we've been talking about it right now, is it's a very present force in how I think all of us see and think about the world.
I
Absolutely.
I just want to add, I think Zarina would be so happy with this pairing. Like there were many instances in the studio where she would show us, Kazim, your work. And she would be
Oh,
like, look at this. Isn't this beautiful? Look at his line here. And Ahmad, you introduced Zarina to Kazim's work, right?
Yeah.
So this program is this beautiful sort of full circle moment where you introduced Zarina to Kazim, Zarina introduced me to Kazim, and now we're all talking about both of their work. So it's a good
Yes,
moment.
I mean, that's the world making that we carry on. I've just got a sort of an eye on the clock, and I think although this
yes.
is by far the biggest gallery, we should address the two other galleries in the exhibition, and we'll do that in a much quicker pace. Um, the second one, and we're moving from one self-portrait to another. And this is the second gallery, also on the ground floor of Ishara, and it's the one-word title of this gallery is Jugar. So Jugar, for those of you who don't know, is an Urdu word that addresses the kind of everyday improvisation that is such a common facet of life in South Asia. And you heard an example from Kazim about using the zinc plates for roofs to do aqua tints that that are now being shown in exhibitions and been acquired with the New York Public Library, and and all of these things. And I think this was intrinsic to his practice. You saw the washing away of layer after layer of water soluble pigment that then accumulates and results in the kind of surfaces where the paint almost seems to inhabit the paper,
Mm,
rather than lie on top of it. In the drawings, and you see an element here where, again, these sort of powder pigments just float on the surface, on mylar, for instance. But for me, I think the most flamboyant example of Jugar is the series of site-specific sculptures that Kazim's done with hair. This is human hair, which is held together by, cheapest chips, Boots hairspray. So it's, rolled sheets, which are then rolled and then hung with invisible thread. So Kazim is drawing in space here. And one of the things we were thinking about as we were talking about, what will we talk about, is that although this exhibition and this gallery is sort of focused on Kazim's Jugar, Jugar was very present in Zarina's work, and Sarah has very kindly picked out two or three examples. So maybe if I turn to you, Sarah, to talk us through Jugar as practiced by Zarina.
So Kazim, when you shared the story of discovering those clay shards, this is such a similar arc to Zarina. So this is the first body of work that she created arriving back in India after 4 years in Paris, where she was working at Atelier 17. This is really where she trained as a printmaker. And, she kind of had the same conundrum where she was used to sort of these European supplies. And she was having difficulty sourcing them, but also she didn't like being dependent on sort of European supplies and depending on friends to bring them back. And she made these are prints of found wood that she has repaired and collaged. And I just wanted to quickly share this one quote. I would pick up wood eaten by insects from the side of the road. I'd bring it home, I'd clean it up, oil it, ink it, and print it. I saw myself in that wood. And this is such a sort of a mirroring of your sort of emotional response to discovering that shard of pottery.
Mm.
And Zarina, when the time that Zarina was making this work, sort of the progressives were ascendant in India. And so this was so different to what was being created by her peers. And
Mhm.
she was sort of, tongue-in-cheek criticized, like, what are you doing? You're literally making art out of garbage. But and she will call this is her first body of work that she felt was entirely her own and sort of not her student work. And then this sort of experimental, Jagar-esque approach to materials continues. These are her cast paper sculptures. And this is, again, Zarina hated being dependent on European paper. And so soon after arriving back in Delhi, she started not just using paper handmade in India, but she went to sort of the paper making centers outside of Delhi and she watched how the paper makers made their paper. And she was really intrigued. She asked them, "Can I cast paper to make sculpture?" And they were like, "No, it can't be done." And then 10 or I think 15 years later, when she's living in New York, she sort of tests that theory and she created these molds out of plexiglass. She would go to Canal Plastics and tell the guys to cut like 15 triangles of this size, 4 squares, and she would build these molds in her studio with like tape and like a drill and wood. And then she would pour paper slurry into it. And as the water drained, these sort of volumetric soft forms appeared. And this was sort of her gateway sculpture. It was after creating these that she started experimenting with bronze. And then if we can switch to letters from home, there's also this sort of Jagar-esque approach to printmaking. Zarina is a classically trained printmaker, but she was very subversive within the norms. And, we can tie this back to Atelier 17, which was an experimental printmaking studio. They were sort of pioneering viscosity and playing around with ink, but Zarina, although she didn't sort of viscosity wasn't her medium, she sort of absorbed that playful mentality. What she's doing over here is she is reusing letters her sister had written to her within this portfolio. And I'm just going to point to sort of the one at the top. She has sort of double printed it. Then she's redacted it later. She's printed on top of it. She has sort of printed over it. And it's this sort of subversive use of both printmaking and the materials that are around you that are not necessarily sort of high art materials. And then there is, Hamad, I'm forgetting the phrase you use, which I love, this economy of
Material
material.
economy. Yeah.
Material
Material
economy.
economy.
Zarina was like a borderline hoarder when it came to her art materials. She would never throw anything away. So she had these leftover strips from the letters from her home portfolio, and they reappeared in collages years later. And it's this beautiful sort of flash of Urdu script that sort of echoes throughout her practice. I'm going to turn it back to you now, Ahmad.
And then, so that was, our sort of thinking about Jugaad, because we've talked about the world, we've talked about that aspect of experimentation and responding to the everyday, whether that's the hairspray or the insect-eaten wood pieces or the shards that you've picked up on, it just felt, given the really intimate um, relationship that both Zarina and Kazim have with literature, it felt really important that we ground, or as it happens, we elevate ourselves. So this is the mezzanine floor of Ishara, and becomes a reading room. So a reading room with texts that explicate both Kazim and Zarina's practice, but also have selections of books that were important both to Kazim and to Zarina. And crucial to that, of course, was Sarah's own text called Reading with Zarina, in which she talks so beautifully and movingly about the books that Zarina would insist on, that she must read if she's to be an educated studio manager and a human being, quite frankly, for Zarina. And alongside that, then we have it in the majority of the alphabets series of prints that Kazim has, punctuated by the occasional painting, and a restrike of the Urdu Proverbs portfolio. So the Urdu Proverbs portfolio was done originally in 1991, as I shared, and then in 2010-11 she did a restrike. And what really sort of intrigued me was that in that restrike she moved the Urdu script to being on its own, so each line then became central to the image itself. So there was the image, and then the line of Urdu was under it. And right at the end wall, you can see those 10 prints, the facsimile copies here. And we're not going to go through all of this, but I thought we'll share just a couple with you. So in this wall, the central 4 images are used to illustrate the word loot in the Qaida. So the images themselves are, of course, te se Tipu ka tiger, Tipu ka sher, te se takht or throne, te se tikriyan, so those pottery shards. And this you can hardly make out because it's a very delicate etching, is Kohinoor. So a line drawing of the Kohinoor diamond. So together they spell loot. And that's just one of the words that the Urdu language has gifted English. There are many others, and that sort of, peppered through. On one side of that is another print. This is Ajaib Ghar, or museum. So this is the Lahore Museum. And funnily enough, you can just about see in the central arch is the metal detector that you walk through. So if you think about that juxtaposition of that metal detector and loot as to who's going in, who's taking what out, what goes in, and on the other side of that is a work. So Kazim worked very hard for this. He always does, but I think this double juxtaposition of the Qaida and the Urdu Worlds exhibition, because you had to complete things for the missing alphabets. And one of them was Zwad. And this is Zaif. For those of you who can sort of zoom in or recognize the image, this is based on a photograph of the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, during his exile in what was then Rangoon or Yangon. And this then is something that Kazim has transformed. So it becomes this portrait of a Zaif Badshah. Kazim, do you want to talk a little bit about the process that you did and what attracted you to this image?
First, I would like to talk a little bit about the loot. Initially, the Qaidas I was going through, which were available in Pakistani market. The Qaidas I was going through, most of the Qaidas have word with alphabet Lam. It's Lota. Lota is object. So I try to read it as a Luta. Luta is looted. So from there, I think I developed that series Loot. And after making etching of Ajaib Ghar, it felt so right to make a portrait of Bahadur Shah Zafar. I love his poetry as a poet. I admire him a lot. And then his last, when he was on exiles, that entire state, really, I mean, it moved me a lot. So I really wanted to complete that set with the last painting of Zaif Badshah, or the frail king. So that's how it came.
Right. And then I think this is the last image that we will share with you, and then we will sort of open it up to questions and conversations. And these two works here. So this I think, is a painting dating back to 2006, maybe. It's a 7 a.m. It's called. It's a man shaving. And right next to it is this beautiful print, very simple to see, very complex to execute. If you can think about a wrinkled pajama hanging on a clothesline, which is, amongst this new body of work that Kazim had made for the show. And here you can see Zarina's restrike of the Urdu Proverbs, and you could probably just make out the text that is underneath the image. And maybe, Sarah, if you want to have the last word on the Urdu Proverb restrike, and if there's anything that struck you on seeing this here now.
So the restrike, I just want to contextualize it. Zarina did this restrike in 2011, which was when her retrospective, which was very critically well received in America, was originating at the Hammer and then at the Guggenheim and then at the Art Institute of Chicago. She was representing India at the Venice Biennale. So all these eyes were sort of turning towards her. And in that moment, for her to sort of revisit this very Urdu work, but then sort of up the Urduness of it by putting the language just under the image and then not translate it. It was such a bold sort of repositioning at such a critical time. And I don't know, this is one of my favorite works by Zarina. This is one of the few where I feel her humor is front and center. I just wanted to translate just the first one, which is after eating 900 mice, the cat goes for Hajj. It's such a funny sort of tongue-in-cheek sort of jab. And these are phrases that she would use these phrases as we were in conversation. And it's so beautiful to see this piece getting this sort of critical attention at Ishara, and hopefully through this program, more and more people will see it.
So I'm going to stop sharing the images at that time, if I have your permissions, Sasha.
Yes, please, Hammad, because we're running short of time, and I'd love to open up this conversation to the others who've joined us today. And if you have any questions, this would be a perfect time to kind of ask, and we can take this conversation a little further. Does anyone want to contribute? Raise the question. I guess not.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, and certainly Hammad, to yourself, Kazim, and Sarah, for what was very informative and a great learning experience for myself. So thank you for taking us through it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I actually have a question for Sarah. And, I find Zarina's relationship to Urdu, from what I have understood, actually, Hammad has opened my eyes to Zarina's practice. And I find that the more we did the walkthroughs, we realized that Urdu is obviously deeply personal to her, yet her work seems to often abstract language into form. So then, like into a line or into a mark. So how do you read this translation from text to image?
I think this is another example of sort of the playfulness of her work and how abstraction was so inherently a part of her visual vocabulary, and especially text abstraction is sort of a major source of Islamic art form. And so for her, she revels not just in sort of the typed Urdu, but also in the intimacy of her sister's script, of a handwriting she sort of understands so well. And it's not always meant to be read. Like sometimes it is purely just for the beauty of the script, and sometimes she wants us to read it, and sometimes she wants some of us to read it. Sometimes she translates, and sometimes she doesn't. And she really beautifully holds that tension between knowing and not knowing, I think.
How beautiful is that?
Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah.
As Sarah, as you were just talking about that, actually, another artist's work was going through my head who Again, I'm not sure Zarina ever met, but they shared exhibitionary space through certainly projects that I've done. And this is Anwar Jalal Shamsa, who was born in Delhi, sort of educated in Lahore, ended up living in kind of exile, self-exile in the UK, in Stafford, up in the Midlands. And towards the end of his life, he did a body of work called Roots, in
Roots.
which roots. So these
Root.
are these plant forms, and above the ground they become floral, but below the ground they move towards cursive script that can never be read.
Right.
So it looks like Arabic or Urdu, in formation, but it just is. And now just thinking about letters with letters from home,
Yeah.
and thinking also about that, the charge of roots as a kind of a late work. And Shamsa sort of is more known for the strict geometry of the circle and the square and their endless interactions. But to have this late style, which
Yeah.
which is so over the top, really. I think it was just sort of thinking about that again.
Mm. I'm curious, Kazim, who were you sort of looking at, as you were studying at Slade, as you were studying in Pakistan, who were you looking at in terms
Mhm.
of other artists?
Well, I remember as a student at NCA, I felt that I learned from actual material in form of what is available in my surrounding. So from Lahore, like I had access to Lahore Museum and some other public collections. So I was looking at miniature painting, Gandhara, then Indus Valley Civilization, these sort of things. I was looking at museum, and from artist perspective, I think I was drawn toward printmaking in a way from my BA time. I was looking at Kiki Smith's work, and some other female artists' work, which I admired a lot. So
Mhm.
these were the artists I think I was looking at around that time.
Mm.
I was wondering, would anyone else like to contribute?
Do have a question if we still have some time.
Yes, we do. Please.
So I'm a student and I'm interested in knowing when it comes to works, like languages and art and works that holds a sacred emotion or value. How do you balance it out in an exhibition setting? I mean, Sarah and Hammad, if you can touch upon it a little bit. And second is if you can also talk about the archetype, the viewers. What was the response, the feedback, the reaction? And quickly, third is like I saw the wall text in the images, but I wasn't able to read it. What was your approach to explain it to the viewers? And how do you balance out translating, explaining, and not over explaining when it comes to objects or art like languages, when it's about language that you are talking about?
Okay, so well, thank you for those three questions, and I'll try and sort of start, and I'm please do everybody else then jump in. The first one, if I am understanding correctly, is you're thinking about how does one balance out the spiritual with the artistic? Is that, am I sort of getting the nub?
Absolutely. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
of the question. So I think for as Sarah mentioned, and it would be good to hear Sarah's idea. Certainly for this exhibition, faith was absolutely fundamental in the practices of both artists, and you see it in just the materials, the approach, the that Zarina's has deployed. I mean, I think even the choice of Sumi ink, you know. Um, this is the color of death. This darkest of dark black, incense being burnt. And this is an artist who is, or a human being who accepts and actually understands their own mortality. And I think for people to be able to do that, there's a connection to the spiritual, which I would argue is not necessarily purely a religious connection. It's a larger connection to the spiritual realm. And then when you say something like the Children of Faith, the Man of Faith, Woman of Faith series, these are things that are coming out of observation of Kazim's. So the young Christian woman holding a Bible on a Lahore bus stop. This is an act. This is somebody wanting to assert their identity. And this is Kazim sort of observing this and wanting to capture it and understand it and think about it. So this was not so much as a curatorial conceit as thinking about what is, or trying to distill these two different practices who already, artists who are already working with this. And finding their own language with that. Is there something you'd want to add to that, Sarah? Or
yeah, I think Hammad, you and I have talked about sort of missed tricks that we sometimes have in exhibitions, and something I feel I missed in my recent Zarina show, which I learned from this show, is where you have not translated, and I've translated every time, and I think that not translation is so important because I truly don't think it always requires it. And I think as curators, like Zarina and Kazim's work, yes, we can write a label, but also the work does a lot of that heavy lifting for us. A person will stand in front of the work and they will feel it. It's really that feeling. And so it's such a privilege to be able to contextualize it, but I almost don't need to get in the way. The art is doing the hard work, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we're sort of going on to your third question, Hira, which was, this idea of explaining or contextualizing and what do we put. So we didn't put translations. And that was a very deliberate choice. Yes, we explained like what jugaad is, because it feels like, okay, this is something that will not be understood. But like that little, that one line of a Fez couplet, Magar dil hai ki uski khana virani nahi jati. I would argue that even if you don't understand the Urdu, it's better to see that or hear it than even get that English translation, which kind of reduces and flattens the emotional charge. And if we think about Zarina making this print in California, I would guess 99.999% of the people will never, understand it, know it, may not even have asked for its translation, but can live with it and feel it because of the real estate that Zarina has given that one line of Urdu text. Yeah. And that's what we try to do in the titles as well, or in the sort of the explicatory text in each exhibition. Not try to explain each work, but give the kind of a route in. If you think of a bridge which allows you in to say, oh yes, what is the world? It's anchored in this land. It's anchored in ways of knowing, of behaving, of cohabiting. You can think about faith, of play, of stories as a way that we go around it, but not do the work of saying who was Mara, where did the Conference of the Birds come from? What's the sort of cultural significance of the hudhud or the hoopoe bird? I think if people are interested, they will find their own path. But even if they stand in front of the work and allow themselves to feel, they will find something, so ways of making meaning.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was absolutely enriching conversation.
Truly, Truly has been. I think, oh, sorry, are there any other questions or comments or something to add? No? But it really has been such an enriching conversation in so many levels. I mean, we lived with the show for almost 5 months, but I wish, we'd had many more conversations like these because I think it's brought a whole new meaning and a whole new, there were already so many conversations that Hammad had kind of posited throughout the exhibition, but these have led to kind of a deeper understanding at so many levels. So I want to say a very big thank you to all three of you and those who've attended. I think it really, I don't know, what it probably leaves us behind with is perhaps language is not something we hold, but something that continues to move and through us, and I think that's what's very significant for me, and that's what I take away. So thank you, for sharing, Ali, for sharing, Zarina, your thoughts, your vision boards, and how these conversations have kind of come together. So truly, thank you. I really appreciate it. For Ishara, thank you.
Well, thank you for hosting us. It was a real pleasure to be part of this project.
Thank you, Hammad, for putting it all together. And Ali, we couldn't have done it without you. And Sarah for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.